It had been a quiet week in the old house. Sarah had moved in just a few days ago, eager for a fresh start after the chaos of her last life. The house, though aged and worn, had an eerie charm to it. Its creaking floors and drafty hallways felt like the kind of place where stories lived, like something out of a Gothic novel. The walls whispered in the night, but Sarah told herself it was just the house settling. Nothing more. The house was situated on the outskirts of a sleepy town, its once grand facade now peeling and forgotten. There were no neighbors nearby, no one to check on her if she needed help, which she thought was exactly how she liked it. A little isolation never hurt anyone. But then the strange thing started. It was subtle at first. A picture frame would be slightly askew, even though Sarah was sure she'd placed it perfectly when she moved in. A door that she swore she had closed tight would be open, just a crack, when she came back from running errands. But she dismissed it all as her imagination. After all, it had been a long time since she'd lived anywhere this quiet. One night, she was lying in bed, reading a book under the dim light of a bedside lamp, when she heard it. A soft tapping sound, rhythmic, almost like the faintest scratching at the walls. She froze, staring at the wall opposite her bed, trying to decide whether she was just hearing things. The sound continued. Tap, tap, tap. It was coming from inside the wall. Her heart started to race. The house was old, but this felt different. It wasn't the sound of the house settling. It wasn't the usual creaks and groans that came with a house of this age. This was deliberate. Probably a rat, Sarah muttered to herself, though the words didn't comfort her. She had heard rumors about rats in old houses, but she had never actually seen one. Maybe she'd call an exterminator tomorrow. She put the book down, intending to ignore it and go to sleep. But then, scratch, a scratch, a scratch. It was louder now, more frantic. It came from the same place, but now it was joined by a low, almost imperceptible hum. Her blood ran cold. It wasn't an animal. She pulled the covers tighter around her shoulders, trying to ignore the feeling creeping up her spine. The hum grew louder, as if it was moving closer. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the sound stopped. Absolute silence filled the room, so thick it was suffocating. Minutes passed, an hour. She could still hear her heart pounding in her ears, and a persistent coldness had settled deep in her bones. But the house was still, until she heard it again. This time, the tapping was accompanied by a soft whisper. Too soft for her to make out the words, but there was no mistaking it. Something was there, behind the walls. Desperately, she grabbed her phone and texted her brother, who lived in a nearby town. "Can you come over? I think something's wrong with the house." Her phone buzzed almost immediately. "What's wrong?" came the reply. "I'm hearing weird noises, like scratching, and a voice. I don't know what's going on." She stared at the phone, waiting for his reply. The silence around her was deafening. She could feel the weight of the walls pressing in on her, the air thick with something unexplainable. "Are you sure you're not just imagining it?" His reply came back. "I don't know. I'm freaking out." Then there was a knock at her door. Her breath hitched. She didn't move. She wasn't expecting anyone. No one came to visit. The knocking came again. A soft, slow tap, tap, tap. She grabbed her phone, her hands shaking, but no one had sent her a message or called. She tried to think. The sound seemed so close, so real. Was someone on the other side of the door? Her breath caught in her throat as she slowly stood, stepping toward the door with her heart pounding. The hallway outside was shrouded in darkness. She reached for the doorknob, hand trembling. The knock came again, but this time it was louder. The sound seemed to echo from the walls around her. She yanked the door open, her breath caught in her chest, but there was no one there. Only the dim light from the hallway stretching long shadows across the floor. She was about to step out, her pulse racing, when she noticed something strange. The wallpaper in the hallway, just beside the door, seemed different. It wasn't the same pattern as before. She took a hesitant step forward. The scratching sound was back, louder now, as though it was coming from behind the walls themselves. She reached out and touched the wall where the wallpaper seemed to bulge, as if it had swollen from the inside. Crack. The wallpaper tore easily under her fingers. Behind it was an opening, just big enough for her to see inside. Her breath caught in her throat as she peered into the small, dark cavity within the wall. It was wrong. The space was impossibly deep, darker than the shadows around her. And then she saw it. A pair of pale, unblinking eyes staring back at her. She staggered back, her heart racing as the figure in the wall slowly moved. No, not moved. It shifted like it was part of the house itself. The eyes blinked and the whisper began again. This time, louder, clearer. "Help me!" The air seemed to freeze. Sarah felt her stomach twist in a way that wasn't just fear. It was like the house itself was alive. It was breathing, watching. And then, in a voice that chilled her to her very bones, the thing behind the wall whispered again. But this time, it was no longer asking for help. "You shouldn't have opened the door." The scratching returned, louder this time. And then, as if on cue, the walls of the house began to creak, groan, and shift. Someone was moving in the dark, and it was coming for her. The next morning, the house was silent. There were no signs of the strange happenings from the night before. No scratches, no whispers, but Sarah was gone. The neighbors, when they finally came to check, found the house empty. No furniture, no belongings, just walls that whispered in the silence. And sometimes, if you're close enough, you can still hear it. The soft, rhythmic tapping coming from behind the walls. It's faint, almost like a lullaby, but it never stops.